Okay, so you're tuning in for a deep dive into Canadian politics.
Sounds good.
Specifically, Jagmeet Singh's recent moves.
Right.
It seems like everyone on Reddit and CTV News is buzzing about his refusal to commit to bringing down Trudeau's government.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's important to remember we're in a minority government situation,
Yeah.
which means a party like the NDP, even though they don't have the most seats, can wield significant influence.
Right.
Singh's basically holding the deciding vote that could trigger an election
Right.
and potentially shake up the whole political landscape.
It's like he's holding all the cards right now.
Yeah.
Just to get you up to speed. Canada's essentially in pre-election mode. Trudeau's Liberals are dealing with a lot of internal drama, with some pretty big names resigning lately. And at the same time, Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives are riding high in the polls.
Yeah, it's crucial to understand this context because it really puts Singh's decisions under a microscope.
Right.
He's facing pressure from all sides,
Yeah.
and he's chosen to play it very cautiously so far. He's publicly said he won't commit to a non-confidence vote,
Right.
citing concerns about stability, especially with the looming economic uncertainty from the U.S. and the incoming Trump administration talking about tariffs.
Right.
He says he needs to act in the best interest of Canadians.
But of course, that leads to a lot of speculation about what his real motives are. Like, what does acting in the best interest of Canadians actually look like in this situation?
Exactly, and that's where things get even more interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of the discussion online, especially those Reddit threads you sent, focuses on Singh's pension.
Right.
It fully vests in February 2025.
Okay.
Some people are suggesting that he's deliberately delaying an election to make sure he secures that financial benefit for himself.
Wow.
There's even been some debate comparing his potential pension, which could be around $50,000 annually after 6 years, to what Canadian Armed Forces veterans receive after decades of service.
Yeah, I've seen some pretty heated comments about that. It definitely seems to be fueling the sellout Singh narrative that's gaining traction. People are comparing him to past NDP leaders like Jack Layton, who they view as more principled and less willing to compromise.
Yeah.
Is this a common theme in Canadian politics, this idea of politicians being accused of putting their own interests ahead of the country's?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The perception of authenticity and a commitment to core values is huge in Canadian politics.
Okay.
When a leader is seen as straying from those values, it can really damage their reputation.
Right.
Some voters feel that Singh has sacrificed those things for short-term political gains.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there's no denying that he has been able to use this minority government situation to advance some key NDP policies.
Okay.
We're seeing progress on things like dental and pharmacare, which could have a real impact on people's lives.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little further. For those of us who might not be as familiar with the Canadian healthcare system, can you explain how these programs work and what their financial implications might be?
Of course, essentially these programs aim to provide financial assistance for dental and prescription drug costs, making them more affordable for Canadians.
Okay.
It's a significant expansion of social safety nets, which is generally popular. However, these programs also come with a hefty price tag.
Right.
And critics argue that they're not fiscally responsible, especially given Canada's current economic challenges.
That makes sense. So it sounds like Singh is walking a tightrope here.
Yeah.
He's pushing for these social programs, which a lot of people support.
Right.
But there are also concerns about their long-term affordability, especially if a more fiscally conservative government, like Poilievre's Conservatives, were to come to power.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Right.
It's a classic dilemma in politics, trying to balance short-term gains with long-term uncertainty, and it's clearly dividing public opinion.
Yeah.
Some applaud Singh for his pragmatic approach, saying he's getting tangible benefits for Canadians. Others criticize him, seeing his hesitation as a sign of weakness, or even worse, self-interest, disguised as concern for the country.
And it's playing out very publicly in those Reddit threads you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the specific comments you've seen?
Well, the CTV News article does a good job of highlighting this range of perspectives. It quotes Singh, explaining his rationale, but it also includes commentary from political analysts who are skeptical of his motives.
Right.
It's a good reminder that in politics, there's rarely a single truth, just different interpretations and competing agendas.
So let's hear some of those differing perspectives.
Okay. One comment that stood out to me said, he knows PP would probably get elected, and he knows that's not in the best interest of our country. So he does want what's best for Canadians.
That definitely reflects the sentiment of those who support Singh's more cautious approach. They see Poilievre and the Conservatives as a potential threat to the progressive policies that the NDP has been fighting for.
Exactly. But on the other hand, there are comments like, I'll get back to you in February after I can collect my pension, Jagmeet Singh.
Wow, that's a pretty cynical take.
Yeah.
But it does highlight the deep distrust that some people have towards Singh's motivations.
They see this whole delay as a self-serving tactic, but of course we can't forget about the elephant in the room, Donald Trump.
Right.
He's back in the White House. And that adds a whole other layer of complexity to this situation.
Absolutely. The potential impact of Trump on Canada is the wild card here.
Mm-hmm.
Some argue that a stable Canadian government is absolutely crucial right now to navigate potential trade wars and protect Canadian jobs.
So is it fair to say that Singh could be justified in prioritizing stability, even if it means delaying an election, considering these potential economic threats from the U.S.? Or is that just a convenient excuse to cling to power?
That's a million-dollar question. It's a difficult one to answer definitively. We have to consider the historical context of U.S.-Canada relations and the potential risks of political instability during a time when things could get pretty volatile between our two countries.
All right, so to understand this a bit better, let's take a step back. What are some historical examples of how Canada has dealt with challenging U.S. trade policies in the past? Have we faced situations like this before, and what lessons can we learn from them? Well, you're absolutely right to bring up history. The U.S. and Canada have this long and complicated relationship when it comes to trade, even before Trump,
Yeah.
came into the picture. Remember those softwood lumber disputes?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That seemed to go on forever?
It feels like every few years we're back at the negotiating table trying to figure that one out.
Right.
Those kinds of disputes must have real consequences for Canadian businesses and workers.
They absolutely do. Take the forestry sector, for example.
Okay.
The softwood lumber disputes highlight how vulnerable Canada can be
Yeah.
when we rely so heavily on one major trading partner, especially one as powerful as the United States.
So thinking about those past situations, how has Canada typically responded to this kind of pressure from the U.S.? Have we stood our ground, or have we usually given in to their demands?
It's really a mixed bag.
Mhm.
There have been times when Canada has taken a very firm stance,
Okay.
even risking trade wars to protect our interests. But there have also been times when we've been more pragmatic, choosing compromise to avoid jeopardizing the overall economic relationship between the two countries.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach, it seems.
Right.
Each situation comes with its own set of challenges and considerations.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder how much of what's happening now is really about Singh's political calculations versus genuine concern for the country's well-being.
Right. And that brings us back to those differing opinions we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find plenty of Reddit users arguing that a strong, united government
Right.
is exactly what Canada needs to stand up to Trump and protect our interests.
Okay.
They see Singh as someone taking a pragmatic approach, putting the country's economic well-being ahead of partisan politics.
It sounds like they're worried that an election campaign would just be a distraction from the important task of dealing with Trump and maybe even signal weakness to the U.S.
That's their perspective, but of course there's the other side of the coin too.
Right.
Some are accusing Singh of being in cahoots with Trudeau, more focused on securing his pension and those NDP policy wins
Right.
than on holding the Liberals accountable for their mistakes.
It's interesting how these online discussions often reflect the broader political divisions within society, isn't it?
It is, and this is where those accusations of sellout Singh come in.
Right.
These commenters see his actions as a betrayal of the NDP's core principles.
Okay.
They believe a fresh mandate is crucial to address the challenges Canada is facing, regardless of what's happening with Trump.
They're essentially saying that delaying an election just kicks the can down the road and could even weaken Canada's position when it comes to negotiating with the U.S.
Exactly. They argue that Trump might perceive a lame duck government as more vulnerable,
Yeah.
more likely to make concessions to avoid conflict. They believe that a newly elected government with a clear mandate from the people would be in a much stronger position to negotiate from a position of strength.
It seems like both sides have some valid points, which makes this whole situation even more fascinating. It's a reminder that there are often multiple perspectives on complex issues, and it's not always easy to determine the right course of action. But let's get a bit more specific about these potential trade tensions with the U.S. Earlier, you mentioned Trump's threats of tariffs. What exactly are we talking about here, and how could they impact Canadian businesses and workers?
Well, during his campaign, Trump specifically targeted Canada's dairy industry.
Okay.
He promised to slap tariffs on Canadian dairy products entering the U.S., arguing that it was necessary to protect American dairy farmers from what he called unfair competition.
Okay, so tariffs essentially make Canadian products more expensive for American consumers. That makes sense. But what would that mean for Canadian dairy farmers specifically?
For them, it could be devastating.
Yeah.
If tariffs make their products less competitive in the U.S., market demand would drop, potentially leading to job losses across Canada's dairy sector, and it wouldn't stop there. We're talking about a ripple effect.
Right.
That could impact processors, distributors, even entire rural communities whose economies depend on the dairy industry.
That's a lot to consider, and it's not just limited to dairy, right? I recall Trump taking aim at other industries like softwood lumber and automobiles as well.
You're right, he's repeatedly accused Canada of engaging in unfair trade practices and has shown a willingness to use tariffs as leverage to renegotiate trade deals to favor the U.S.
Right.
This unpredictability creates a lot of uncertainty for Canadian businesses that rely on exporting to the U.S.
So how do we weigh these competing perspectives? How can we understand the potential consequences of Singh's decision to delay an election?
That's the key question, isn't it? We need to look beyond the immediate political maneuvering and think about the long-term implications. What are the risks of delaying an election, and how do those risks compare to the potential instability that could arise in U.S.-Canada relations if we have an election right now?
You mentioned the historical context of U.S.-Canada relations. What are some specific examples of how past trade disputes have played out, and are there any lessons we can draw from them? It's interesting to think about how these trade disputes are never really just about economics. They become intertwined with politics and national identity, too.
That's a great point, and it's definitely true in this case with Trump back in the White House. It feels like we're entering a period where those trade relationships
Right.
could be tested in ways we haven't seen in a while.
I guess that's what makes Jagmeet Singh's gamble so interesting.
Yeah.
It's hard to say whether he's making the right call. On the one hand, he could be playing a very strategic long game, trying to use his leverage in this minority government to secure those NDP priorities while also navigating the potential storm brewing south of the border.
But it's a delicate balancing act, wouldn't you say? If he miscalculates, he could end up alienating voters who see him as too cozy with Trudeau, and he might not even achieve those policy goals in the end. And of course, there's that lingering question about his motives and whether personal gain is factoring into his decisions.
It all circles back to that question of trust, doesn't it?
Right.
Do voters trust him to make decisions that are truly in the best interests of the country, or do they see his actions as primarily motivated by self-preservation and political maneuvering? It's a question that only time will answer, I suppose.
And the answer will likely have significant implications not just for the NDP, but for the entire Canadian political landscape. The choices made in the coming months will shape the direction of the country for years to come.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about this political drama unfolding in Ottawa?
Because it affects your life in so many ways, even if you don't always realize it. The decisions made by politicians have a ripple effect on everything from the economy to healthcare to the environment. Think about the potential impact of those dental and pharmacare programs we discussed earlier. Those could make a real difference in the lives of many Canadians. And then there's the whole question of trade, which could impact jobs, the cost of goods, and the overall economic well-being of the country.
It's easy to get cynical about politics, but we have to remember that it shapes the world we live in. Understanding how the game is played, the motivations of the players, and the potential consequences of their actions can help you make informed choices as a citizen. It can even help you engage in those online discussions in a more meaningful way, maybe even change someone's mind.
Exactly, and that's really why we do these deep dives. We want to cut through the noise, break down complex issues, and help you grasp the nuances of what's happening in this case. Jagmeet Singh's calculated gamble is a perfect example of how personal ambition, political strategy, and national interests can all collide in fascinating and unpredictable ways.
So as you continue to follow this story, ask yourself, what are Jagmeet Singh's true motivations? Is he a shrewd political operator playing the long game, as some believe, or is he more of a self-serving opportunist putting his own interests ahead of the country's, as others suggest?
And how will his decisions ultimately impact Canada's relationship with the U.S., particularly with Donald Trump back in the White House? These are questions that will continue to unfold in the coming months. The answers will have profound implications for all of us.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think is Singh making the right call? Is he playing with fire? Share your perspectives on our social media channels. Let's keep this conversation going. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Canadian politics.